So here we are, 2 days after being relegated, and despite that stale club statement suggesting that the work is starting immediately to get us back into the Premier League, our situation is no clearer as to who is going to be managing West Ham next season, who our director of football will be, or whether we even get a director of football, and which players might actually be staying on who have the stomach to fight a promotion chasing season. Now, as far as the director of football is concerned, the news broken out earlier today is that apparently we're chasing Middlesbrough's head of football, Kieran Scott, to become our new director of football. He was once at Norwich before moving to Middlesbrough, who just missed out on promotion to the Premier League. He's highly thought of and well respected, and he knows the Championship really well. So that's an interesting story, and let's see how that unravels. But let's deal with the West Ham's managerial situation first of all. We were led to believe that a meeting was held either at Rush Green or at Sullivan's abode between the club's hierarchy and Nuno Espirito Santo to discuss the managerial future. That meeting was held on Monday. Now, we kind of expected an announcement to be made straight after, or at least this morning, Tuesday morning, but nothing. It's a load of silence at the moment. And we hear that apparently that there's a divide between board members. Some want to keep Nuno, others want him gone. That could be true, but I'd be very surprised if this wasn't discussed before the meeting with Nuno itself. Now, I can't imagine for a moment that there would be a divide during the meeting itself. We're pretty amateur, but I don't think even we would stoop that low to have a disagreement during a meeting. I guess the board will have wanted answers as to why Nuno couldn't keep West Ham in the Premier League, and would also want to know what he plans to do and what he will need in order to get us back to the Premier League at first attempt. And maybe from that, board members may conclude which direction they take next. But I would imagine that Nuno is going to want some answers too. Now, some things that might be on his mind could include who is going to be the next director of football. And by the way, West Ham board, Nuno doesn't like working with a director of football, so you might want to consider that approach. Which of the players are you going to keep at West Ham? If you're going to make quick-fire sales, then who will Nuno have left to work with? And despite our financial situation, how much money will there actually be to invest in this squad? What direction are we going to take in the transfer market? Is it going to be established players who know all about the Championship? Or will Nuno be able to do what he did at Wolves and bringing in some fantastic players who are going to get us out of this league pretty fast? But if we're doing that, if we go out and buy ourselves some really classy, expensive players, then why not go all out to keep Bowen, Fernandes, Dinos, Somerville, Castellanos? And then I guess Nuno would want assurances for himself, not only control of transfers, but his salary. We hear that everyone at West Ham United are going to have their salaries cut by half now that we've been relegated. But maybe Nuno will want some kind of assurance. If I get you back up, then what about a nice big fat bonus for doing so? Then let's deal with the playing staff that Nuno might still have at his disposal. For several weeks leading up to the final game of the season, all we were hearing was that our players were already committing themselves to other teams. Fernandes off to Man United, Bowen off to Liverpool or Newcastle or his old club Hull, Somerville off to clubs abroad, Dinos back to Germany. The list goes on. I think one thing is for certain: players like Edson Alvarez, Nicholas Füllkrug, possibly James Ward-Prowse if Nuno stays, and other high-earning players like Alphonse Areola will go well before this summer is over. Then the players who have fallen out with Nuno are also going to depart. That includes Callum Wilson, I mentioned James Ward-Prowse, and Jean-Claire Todibo. And just to touch on that for a moment, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that some players will have been upset by Nuno's approach. We heard very early on that Nuno decided that James Ward-Prowse wasn't part of his plans. He was even pretty honest about it and said it himself. We also heard in January that Nuno had told Callum Wilson he could leave, only for the board to intervene and make sure he stayed on. And then the whole thing with John Clare Todibo. He fell out with Lopetegui. He fell out with Potter. Is it any surprise that he fell out with Nuno after being subbed against Newcastle? Look, players have got egos. Managers need to make decisions. And Nuno did what he thought was right at the time during that game. Mind you, I don't blame Todibo for Newcastle's first goal. That was on Hermansen, his poor pass to him. And now we now know Nuno should really never have started with a back three in the first place. So who will stay? There are noises suggesting that Bowen and Souček may actually stay on because of the affinity they have with the club. But can Nuno or the board keep any of the other first team starters? There's a lot to unravel at West Ham, but the one thing hanging over all of this is the dark cloud that we know is our dire financial situation. Over £100 million in losses last year, the prospect of losing something like 150 odd million pounds in revenue next season in the Championship, the balancing act is going to be difficult. So it's no wonder that Nuno, or any other prospective manager for that reason, will be asking several questions before committing to stay at the club. So it's not all about what the board wants. In fact, they may have more questions to answer than they have to ask. And that may be in a position, they may be in a position to have to try harder to keep the likes of Nuno at the club. So it's going to be quite interesting what happens over the next few days. You know, we're kind of expecting an announcement about manager. I think that's got to be the first thing that happens. We've got to know who our manager is going to be in order for everything else to fall into place. But once the manager decision is made, then other things are going to have to happen pretty quickly. If we're going to get a director of football, let's do it now. Let's do it quickly. Let's not wait a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We want to have to start. We want to be able to start the transfer window on the front foot. So first manager, director of football, if that's going to happen. And then there's got to be a commitment from the club to suggest how much money is going to be invested in this board, in this team. Because if there's no money, there's no decent manager. If there's no decent manager, you might as well forget about a director of football. And then we might end up languishing in the Championship for several seasons to come. A lot of big decisions at West Ham. And the first one has got to be about the manager himself. Let's see what happens over the next few days.